Welcome to another program for Speak Up Tampa Bay. This is Speak Up Presents, and today we're talking about sexual discrimination on Wall Street. We're very happy to have with us today Susan Antilla, who's the author of a book called Tales from the Boom Boom Room in its second printing, or in its paperback form right now, I'm sorry. Welcome. I'm glad you made it down here from the snow.
Great to be here.
We have Edna Broyles, who's a certified financial planner. Welcome. I'm glad you made it.
Thank you.
And Elizabeth Howarth, who's a certified financial planner and a CIMA.
CIMA.
What does that mean?
Investment Management Analyst.
Certified Investment Management Analyst. So we've got all of you. So we were going to talk about sexual discrimination. I know you wrote a book, and why don't you talk to us about that? Tell me what is in that book.
Well, it's called Tales from the Boom Boom Room, and there actually is a Boom Boom Room. It was a party room in the basement of a Smith Barney retail office out in Garden City. And basically it's a story of women.
There was a boom boom
There
room.
was a boom boom room.
Meaning, what was that room used for?
The guys in the office called the party room the Boom Boom Room. And they actually listed it in the company phone book under the B's. They were down there often enough that they needed to
And who went there? Who went to the boom boom room?
The guys would go down there as early as 10 o'clock in the morning for parties. So it was a well-used room.
With women who were employed by the company, or no?
With one another. I think the women were not very comfortable, so if they went down once, they typically didn't go down again.
Okay, all right, go on, I'm sorry.
But the story is really about those women in that office who got started complaining about what was happening, you know, life on Wall Street and life in a retail branch office. They sued the firm and got women all across the country to really get together and start talking about the things that were going on where they really had not been talked about before. And so I traced the story through the book of what was going on.
Beginning what year?
Well, the suit was filed in 1996, but the women in that office were complaining as far back as 1980, and really nothing was happening. I mean, women would, Pam Martens, who was the lead plaintiff in that suit, complained to the former president of the firm in the 1980s, and just nothing happened. She actually got an aerobics class out of it. That was the way that they would respond to problems.
She was complaining about the way they talked to her, or money, or?
She complained that the women didn't get equal compensation. She complained about things like the men being taken out on company money to golf outings and the women being told that they couldn't come along. And then a level of vulgarity that we really can't talk about on television.
You can talk about anything on cable.
But well, thanks for your permission.
I'm sorry,
but,
you don't have to. But
women,
just so you knew that, I just.
Well, it's really pretty offensive, and the women would come into the office, and the guys would talk about their sexual exploits over the weekend and what they did to women. And
we've made a lot of advances in that way. I know women do that now. Sorry to say.
This was done, but this, Louise, was done really to make the women feel as uncomfortable as possible in the workplace. And you know, things pranks like sending condoms through the pneumatic tube system and having strippers come into the office and do strip acts. And I mean, this was out in an open office where everybody would see it. A very uncomfortable place to work.
A lot worse than just having a pinup calendar.
It was a lot worse than that.
Yeah.
And a very vulgar branch manager who would tell the women, I have guys here who have to pay mortgages, as if the women didn't. I'm going to pay my guys more than that, and if you don't like it, you can try to sue me. Lots of people have tried, and nobody's ever gotten anywhere.
Boy, aren't you making an argument for the Equal Rights Amendment that we're still trying to get ratified in the state of Florida. But Edna, you were one of the people involved in this lawsuit.
Yes, I was.
Tell us about that. Still involved because you will not settle.
Well,
and there's a reason why you won't. Talk about that.
Well, first of all, it's been a long process, and my passion has really been for the other women as well as myself. And the fact of the matter is, we had a lot of support in regards to women around the country after we found out, in fact, it became class action status, because at first we had no idea. At first we, quite frankly, thought it was a Tampa problem. And then it became a nationwide, and I have been one of 25 of the class action representatives, representing 23,000 women nationwide in this particular case. In
the case that you're involved.
Exactly.
What would be the end result for those 23,000 women if you win, or it finally gets?
Well, many of them have settled. There have been monetary settlements for them, and unfortunately many of them cannot talk about it because they have signed off and they are now gagged. And
but there'll be money.
There will be some compensation.
Has change occurred? Do we know?
It's been very limited, very limited.
So you mean more cases could be being built as we speak?
Well, a lot of things have not changed. Unfortunately, I would like to have, after this length of time, more than 9 years in this particular case, I think there have been a number of changes, but I think that there's been a lot that we still have to see. And we're just going to continue to do as much as we can for as long as we need to in order to make those changes.
Elizabeth, what do you think about all this? I know you were involved in the case, but you're a financial planner yourself, and you had a hard time becoming one.
Well, I did have a hard time being hired, but that historically in the business, the people who have family connections, I was new to Florida, I was over 40, I was a single parent, I was a woman, I was coming out of education, so none of those things would predicate that I would be successful in the business. So yes, I did. But I persisted. My situation was a little different. I rarely take no for an answer when I want yes. So I didn't suffer to the extent that you're talking about with the boom boom room. Yeah, there were,
But when you got in the field, what year was that already?
1990.
Yeah, and they're talking about things that even occurred prior to that and culminated in the 96 lawsuit.
I think it is a very tough business. There's no doubt about that. An awful lot of women choose not to be in it. It's difficult, particularly for young women, and I don't really know the answer to that. It's not even discrimination aside, it's a difficult business, and it is truly survival. And when you just put your head down and just do your job. I admire Edna tremendously because she has carried this banner, and in fact feel a little guilty about it. But I had, as I said, a single parent. I didn't have that luxury at that particular juncture. I also, my second year in the business, fought breast cancer, and I'll have to say my firm couldn't have been nicer, in that extent. So, and the things that were done before I came along were part of this.
Did you feel as much support as a woman in one of your firms, which will be nameless, did you feel as much support as you saw that the men were getting?
I didn't even make that distinction. And the reason I didn't make that distinction is because I didn't have the luxury of that, frankly. I didn't feel like okay, yeah, I'm discriminated against, and just, do my job. And because I had to.
Right. Susan, you saw, you're a financial journalist, or a journalist that covers finances for many years.
Right.
So did you get intrigued by having seen this happen? Did you see the inside of this? How did you come upon wanting to write the book? And
well, I've been covering the financial business for 25 years now, and
right.
I should say, just to back up, although the lawsuit was filed in 1996, some of the incidents, this is not over, and some of the incidents in the book were as late as late 2002.
Oh,
so
my.
And I've updated the book for the paperback editions, so I would maintain that this is not over and it's not ancient history. But the way that I got onto the story was completely by accident, and I actually was at a point where I thought, issues about women on Wall Street are not a big deal. I sort of took it for granted, just like Elizabeth does. That's the way it is. But I was a reporter at the New York Times in 1995, and I had just written a story about a company called Aldi Discount Corporation, which was, a discount brokerage firm that was slowly expanding around the country. And I wrote investigative pieces, and I had written about problems that investors were having with Aldi, just investors, sales practice abuses. And I came into the office that day, and my voicemail was overloaded with phone calls from people who all said, "You missed the story." Now, you're a reporter. What do we hate more than having people say, "You jerk, you missed the story"?
Right.
And all of the calls were from women, and they all said, the real story here is the way this firm is treating us, and we're all getting driven out of the firm. And you know, my first reaction was to say, well, okay, I've been doing this for, at that point, 17 years. I know women get treated
But
badly.
you probably were unusual being a woman covering finance, weren't you?
Oh, I was always the only woman in the room. And
Okay.
I was accustomed to, you
All
know,
of that,
men
yeah.
who would say, "Oh, honey, do you know the difference between a stock and a bond?" You know, I mean, I was so used to that, and you know, I just was used to it. But I had all these phone calls, and I started calling people back, and they said, "We're being driven out of the firm, and we're the best producers." And you know, I thought, this doesn't sound right. I mean, on Wall Street, they'll take money from a pink polka-dotted kangaroo. I mean, if you're making money,
why do that, right?
and so I said, prove it to me. And the faxes started coming in with, you know, the commission runs for the best bond, you know, producers. And at the top of the list would be Sally and Susie and Mary. And Sally and Susie and Mary were calling me to say that they were getting run out of the firm. They were getting fired. They were getting transferred 100 miles away.
And what do you mean by the top of the list? The lowest amount of...
No, they were the best producers.
Oh, the best producers,
They
okay.
were the top producers.
Okay.
And I said, this is an amazing story because it makes no sense in terms of what I have always believed Wall Street to be.
Right.
And so...
You thought money was the great equalizer, or the, the
absolutely.
production of, or the
And-
generation of money, right?
Yeah. And in fact, that's the reason, really, that women were drawn first to going into the retail part of Wall Street, because I think that they really believe this dream that, you know, at least there, it's a meritocracy. If I go in and make as much money as anybody else, they're going to keep me. And so I pursued the story. A month later, we ran the story in the New York Times, and because there were women all over the country at this firm who had the same thing going on, and it was Edna and the lead plaintiff, the person who ended up being the lead plaintiff at Smith Barney, read the story, and I had no idea, but clipped the story and ended up hiring the same lawyers for the Smith Barney suit. And so it was dominoes, but I wasn't looking for the story. The story sort of came and found me.
That's one of the times you wish that the media would get credit for something, huh?
Well,
But
actually,
once you bring it into somebody's awareness about an issue, that some change could occur, that some action could take place, that you caused an action by someone else, that you really made a difference by doing that. So it sounds like you did.
I mean, I knew that it was a great story.
Yeah.
The flips. I mean, I'm really trying to say to you, I wasn't looking for it. You know.
I know.
I mean, but that's really how the ball got rolling. And I have to say, there's a lot of resistance to the story. Editors hate this story. They're very uncomfortable about it. They see it as a very risky
Are the
story.
editors women or men?
Well, most business editors are
Or
men.
men. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So it makes it more difficult. Although that story didn't just run in the New York Times, though. I mean, that ran pretty much.
Well, I broke the oldie story in the Times, and then by the time Edna and Pam were ready to go with the Smith Barney suit, I was then at Bloomberg News, and I broke their story at Bloomberg News. And that was a very emotional story. Before they were ready to file, I spent the month before that on the phone trying to talk to women because my editor said, you can go with that story. I knew the suit was coming, and he said, you can go with that story, but you have to corroborate every single thing in that complaint before I'll let you go with that story. And
You couldn't just attribute it to the complaint. You had to actually go out.
Well,
what
we
were
were
you doing? Like you were being the lawyer.
Well, sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
He said, I want you to go out and find somebody independent to tell you that that's going on, because it's such, you know.
Oh, right. You could really hurt.
Because
right,
these
that's true.
allegations are such fiery allegations. And getting people to talk on the phone, these women were so frightened. You know, it would be like getting a CIA clearance to get someone to believe me that I would talk to them off the record, that I wouldn't use their names, that I wouldn't call them at the office. And sometimes I'd go through this whole sort of security clearance with them, and you know, their lawyers would tell them I was okay to talk to. And you know, at 11 o'clock at night, I'd finally get them on the phone. I'd put my son to bed, give him some beefaroni, tell him I had no time for him that night.
Right.
And I'd get on the phone with them, and they'd start crying, and I'd never get the interview.
Wow.
I mean, they were distraught. They were terrified. It's not so bad now because they have a sense that there are other people out there like them.
And now, what kind of retribution would you get, or did you get any? I mean, you did step forward.
Of course, I was eventually fired, as was the lead plaintiff, Pam Martins, and it's because I would come forward, and I went up the chain of command from my branch manager in Tampa, who, quite frankly, I thought was the culprit all along, not realizing that it was really coming from the top management down. And so I put everything in writing. I had been in corporate situations prior to this, and so I thought I was doing the right thing and helping them out by letting them know about this. when in
You
fact...
were being an innocent when you started.
Absolutely.
Oh, let me change the culture here and help them keep
Understand.
women. Okay.
And knowing how strong they could be. And yet then I went to see other things, and it wasn't the right thing, and so I said, no, we need to make some major changes here. And at that point, I was the #2 producer in that office, and yet, you know, there were youngsters coming in as trainees that were boys, so to speak, and you know, they would get anything they wanted. And so it was a fight all the way up. And at one point, you know, I said this kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back when we had an operational concern, and the branch manager called my husband.
And said, tell her to back off, like he could control you, or he should.
Exactly.
Quick, can't you get her to back off? Am I right?
Exactly.
Am I guessing?
And
Something like
another
that?
female broker who was not married, you know, he threatened to call her dad.
Well, yippee. Boy, that would really get us fiery women under control, won't it?
Absolutely. But we saw that there were a lot of other women that seriously needed help, and they were not in a position to come forward. And I felt that it was that important to do so.
When you saw this article that Susan wrote, tell me what was your reaction? I guess this is what, and did that precede your putting everything in writing to your branch manager and taking up the chain of command, or had you already been doing that?
Oh no, we had been doing this for years.
Oh, you had already?
Oh yes, ours started in the 80s actually. And so this had been going on for some time. And so when Susan came involved, and she was very brave to even bring the story forward, and I applaud her to even get it out there, because it's a very serious one, and I hope that everybody will get the message. And I think that men and women alike, you know, would like to see the workplace a better place altogether.
Well, we now have so many things, so many, at least the cities and the municipalities and the governments have sexual discrimination policies, and so don't these companies have them written
They have
by
policies, but the unfortunate part is they have kangaroo courts. You have to sign a U4 and that you will not sue your employer going forward. And the loophole there was the class action status and so forth, that we were able to go forward and quite frankly go as far as we have to try to get some help for the women across the nation.
You had to, wait a minute, you would have to sign something that said, if I find discrimination here, I won't sue you?
You have to sign when you initially are employed with the company, any brokerage office, that you will not sue the company. You will actually go into an arbitration situation as opposed to going to court.
Okay. But
So
if you go into arbitration, that doesn't work. You always have the right to go to court. I mean, this is still America, isn't it?
No, you don't.
Well,
and
no, it
that's
isn't
the problem.
really, now that I think about it.
And that's really been the whole problem. It's been
Not
a
after-
kangaroo court. And we've had problems from the top down, from the bottom up.
Is that constitutional, what they've done with that particular
It's gone to
item?
the Supreme Court.
That the issue of whether or not you are forced into arbitration and not be able to go for it, and was that in place before you got going with your lawsuit?
Oh, yes.
That's been in place forever?
Yes.
That's interesting. Your thoughts, Elizabeth, on all that?
Well, in listening, I certainly see how much better things became when I got into the business. The ultimate is revenge is to do well. But what you're saying, Susan, is that didn't help with, and also you, Edna. So now,
even in
of course,
2002, she's still talking about discrimination and so forth, still taking place.
I think that's always true.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much, you know, as Susan said, you just take it for a matter of course and go on.
Well, that's what we did. Anybody my age knows that, you know, and I worked for Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 1000 companies, and of course back then there wasn't even any awareness, and nobody was talking about it. We just learned to pretend that a sexual joke went over our heads. We didn't get it. We didn't hear it. You know, a lot of the things that had occurred, you just kind of knew. You learned from the women who were a little bit older than you how to handle a lot of that. And I remember I was working for a very large company. I was in my early 20s, and I was standing on the coffee wagon would come around, big companies, how they would send these coffee wagons around so you could get your coffee in the morning. And I was standing online for my coffee. You can tell I'm a New Yorker. I said online, not in line. Someone tapped my backside while I was on that line, and I just automatically, from having hung around the New York bar scene, the single scene, just went up and just turned around and slapped him right across the face, and then thought I would be fired. Absolutely thought that I would be fired for doing that, and I shocked myself, but it was just such an automatic thing. And then I remember that it was a slap heard around the office, so someone, I got called in by the head boss, and he said, what happened out there? I said, oh, nothing, everything's under control. And then he said, now, something did happen out there, and you better tell me what it is. And I told him that, what had occurred, and he said, he owes you an apology. And I said, I'm sorry, please don't fire me, don't fire me. I'm so sorry I slapped him, I'm doing like that. And this fellow was way ahead of his time, because that was in the 70s, or early 70s. The boss man was ahead of his time and had something like 11 sisters or something like that. He was a Midwesterner with 11 sisters, and he made darn sure that that guy came out, was called into his office, the guy that had done it, and then he had to come and apologize to me in his presence. But it was so unusual that I honestly thought I'd be fired. But most of the time you let these things go over your head and you just say that's part of the work scene and you do nothing about it. But I want to talk to you more about this. They want me to take a little break for a PSA, so we'll be back in just a minute.
What would you do if you had to choose between the buffalo and the giraffes? Between a flower or an elephant? What would you choose? What if you had to decide between a 100-year-old tree and a 1,000,000-year-old beach? Between drinking clean water or breathing clean air? Would you make the right choice? Would there be a right choice? Now there's a way to help. Not just one, but all these things. EarthShare, the world's leading environmental groups working together. It's one choice we can all live with. Ask your employer about workplace giving.
Hi, and welcome back to Speak Up Presents. We're talking about sexual discrimination on Wall Street today, and rejoining us are Susan Antilla, Edna Broyles, and Elizabeth Howarth. We were just talking about the mandatory arbitration. Could you elaborate on that? Is that something that is only within the financial services industry?
Well, it used to be just in financial services, and as Edna said before, in order to just to get a license, you had to sign away your rights to go to court if you had any dispute over anything. As a result of all of the publicity that came about after the lawsuits that Smith Barney's women brought and Merrill Lynch's women brought, it was so embarrassing to the industry that they changed that clause just slightly, and they said that if you have an employment dispute, you don't have to go to arbitration anymore. That really ended up not making any difference at all, though, because now what the firms do is, on your first day of work, they give you a piece of paper and you sign a private contract that says that you'll settle any dispute between you and your firm in arbitration. So it's gone from being government mandated through your licensing with the SEC, which is sort of unbelievable anyway, to being just a firm-by-firm issue. So you're still bound to arbitration.
What's your recourse then? You do go to arbitration. Is that a fair? Has that happened? Do women? Well, they must have to.
Well, they have to go. I mean, they have to go. It has gotten better also as a result of their fight. So these fights have not been for nothing. They've really accomplished something. Now the arbitrators, it used to be the average arbitrator was a 60-year-old white male. The GAO did a study in 1994, and that's what they found. Now arbitration panels must include a woman. There is some limited discovery, so you can at least get some data about your firm when you go into your arbitration. So it's a little bit more fair than it used to be.
How does that supersede our U.S. Department of Labor regulations and rules? Because as I recollect, you could agree with an employer that you weren't going to put in for overtime. But if you should have gotten overtime, it doesn't matter whether you signed away your overtime rights or not. The Department of Labor will fight for you to be restored the money that you lost. And you know, if they made you a particular kind, if shortchanged you in any way, like they do with, I know this most because I have 3 techie sons, but in the technical fields, if you're not paying at least, I think the number is $55,000 a year, you cannot not pay overtime. You cannot eliminate overtime. But they'll try it. I mean, you know, there are companies that'll try it and be unfair to people. But the Department of Labor says even if you knew that, even if you were told that, even if you agreed to it for 10 years, the employer still has to come back and be fair to you, because we have laws on the books about how one is treated from a U.S. Labor Department standpoint.
Not every single employee in the industry is a licensed person, for starters. These are brokers, analysts, people with licenses are the people I'm talking about here who are bound to arbitration.
They're still...
Well, I realize that. I know where you're going with it.
They're still employees, they're still labor.
But it's gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said in 1991, if you go in and sign that piece of paper, you have signed a private contract. And that's that.
But you could sign a private contract, a loan shark agreement, and it would be invalidated because it is against the law to sign such a document.
This is what Edna and Elizabeth and you know, any women who work in the industry.
And if you say I don't want to sign that, you can't get the job. Is that the deal?
Well, not only that, there have been firms. There was a case where a woman named Susan Desiderio wanted to switch from one firm to another, had gone through a terrible arbitration, and she went to a new firm, and she said, all I want to do is cross out that one clause about arbitration. And they said, we have no problem with that, cross it out. The National Association of Securities Dealers wouldn't let her do it, even though she and the firm agreed. It was a government issue, and the industry wants to protect this right.
Wow, what power.
Yes, it's a lot of power.
People have lost their jobs over this, have they not? You mentioned you did, and do you know how many women have lost their jobs over trying to go after these companies? Or?
Well, I can tell you how many women have lost their jobs since the recession that we went through recently. In the New York metro area, which is where we have the most people who are employed in financial services, if you look at the jobs that we had at the peak in the end of 2000 until 2002, after you saw all the effects of the recession and 9/11 and all the terrible things that we went through up in the Northeast, we went from 557,000 people employed up there. And 2 years later, 72,000 women had lost their jobs. 14,000 men gained jobs. It's really quite extraordinary.
Well...
That's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
But that's not giving you any causes. Don't you think a lot of women... I know a lot of people who left New York. I mean, the day it happened.
They weren't all women.
No, they took some men with them, but they got out.
And
they just said they took some small people with them too. They even took pets.
Right, but they weren't all women.
I'm sure there's less pets there now too.
They weren't all women. And even if you, no matter how you look at this, Louise, I mean, if you look at Securities Industry Association numbers, the trade group for the industry, in 1999 you had 43% women in the industry. Today you have 37% women.
Okay, if you look at it like that, that's different. Okay.
And if you look at a little
47%, does that include
37 now from 43?
From 43, does that include? That's just women brokers, licensed?
That's everybody in the industry, all employment in the industry.
But probably the backup staff is all women, isn't it too?
That's exactly right.
So maybe we put some men in some secretarial jobs.
I'll tell you another thing though. If you look at sales assistants, which are the low-level jobs, people who assist brokers, that's one of the only groups that has seen a rise in employment in the last year in women.
How do you account for that?
has seen a rise.
A rise. More women in those jobs. The
Well, I
low-level
tried
jobs.
to hire 2 men. They were total washouts, so there you go.
So now you're back to women?
I'll
No,
tell
you got a
what,
couple of men working for you,
I
don't
think
you?
that, yeah, I can certainly understand your statistics, but I will also tell you that women take it very personally when people lose money. And I think it was the most painful experience I have ever been through to go through 2000, 2001, and 2002. It was a bloodbath in the markets. There were brokers who left right and left just because they didn't feel like they had the tools or they didn't feel like they had the stomach for it. So I understand that some of those people may have been fired, but I also know friends of mine who said, enough is enough. I'd rather work at Nordstrom's. I mean, you know, it's just too stressful and it's too painful. And I'll tell you, as a broker, it is not a 9-to-5 job. It's not even an 8-to-6 job. That's more like a 7-to-10 job, meaning 7 in the morning till 10 at night. That exacts,
A little like a TV station.
Right.
Almost.
Exacts a terrible price from young women, from older women who have families, family responsibilities. And there are women who say, my life and my lifestyle and the people in my life are more important. Of course, this sounds like I have no life, which is probably true, but I think that's something that is not readily understood about just the women's psyche through this time period. And I know that's not all of it, but I'll tell you, there were times I certainly thought, oh, I'd rather be anywhere but here.
So you'd guess that disparity, that 37% versus 43, did you say?
Right.
Might have been just women's natural sensitivity to a lot of things.
I don't know. I'm not saying
Yeah.
a cause and effect. I'm saying that that's something that's often not considered. Certainly there are fewer sales assistants than there were in my particular small arena. I don't know. There are also fewer brokers, and there will be 50% fewer brokers in 5 years than there are right now, in my humble opinion.
There'll be, say that again?
50% fewer.
And how will we get services then? Oh, do you think it's as a result of people taking control of
Retiring?
themselves?
Retiring? No, I don't think
People taking control of their own money, I mean, or
No, I don't think
the
it's gonna be
internet or these kinds of things?
I think each one of us who stays in the business will serve more people. There will be lots of asset gatherers, but there won't necessarily be brokers.
What do you think about the loss of women in the field? And is that your opinion too, that maybe they just were sensitive to things, or do you think there's more to that story?
I think it's a combination. And having seen what many have gone through across the nation, I'd like to think that the reason that we continue to fight this whole thing is so that we can include more women, and that they will come forward, and we will empower more to come forward. And I happen to think that women are trusted, maybe more so with people's money. And so I would like to encourage women to come on board. And it is not an easy position. I will tell you that from the very beginning. And I have tried to hire both men and women, and I have been successful at it over the years. In other words, not only do I have an assistant, but I've had interns, if you will, from the University of Tampa and University of South Florida and so forth that have come in, and I've encouraged both men and women over the years to come into it. And I think that they see that it is a grind, and it does take quite a bit, but I think that they can certainly do it, and I think it's a position that women can be very, very successful. So
You think you'll see some more women?
I certainly hope that we're paving the way for them.
Are we seeing them in the colleges or
I'll tell
certified
you.
financial planning school or these kinds of things? Do we know any statistics on that, whether women are coming through?
They've certainly, in my particular office right now, they've tried to hire any number of women. And whether they're choosing badly, they are under such pressure to hire women right now that a female walking in pretty near gets hired, which is also bad because...
Why are they under pressure for that?
Because they're trying to actually get a better balance of women in the business.
Do people ask for women if they call your firm or other firms?
Sometimes they do, yeah.
They say, I want a woman. Yeah, for years when I buy a car, the first thing I do when I walk into the dealership is say, when all those people say hello and they look like they're going to like grab you right out of the seat of your car. I mean, you're not even sure you're stopping there yet and they're outside, hello. If you don't have a woman here, I pass and won't buy a car from a male. I mean, there's certain things you want to try to give business to women, and you want to know if the place even has a woman, you know, that's in their employ. So, I mean, there's lots of things we can do about, you know, the way we spend our money. As you put it, we have a hold of the money most of the time, even though they're just finally realizing that. Like whether it's ours, you know, yours is mine and mine is mine.
Yeah.
You know, our theory. And so even if it belongs to somebody else, we usually are the ones that help make that decision or do make the decision, right? So that may be why they're looking for women.
And more women inherit money and so forth. But our case actually mandated that they hire more women. That was part of the whole agreement. And so
Oh, it
nationwide-
was?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, it's no secret that managers are given bonuses to hire new people, and so they may get a little extra to hire women.
Very good. How about the loss of women since? Okay, the women that did settle, are they? Did anybody follow them? What's happening with them? Are they doing better, worse, or did they get out of the business, or could they work for somebody else afterwards? What happened to them?
Most of the women who I read about in the book are not in the business. Most of the women who have been sexually harassed in the business end up without a job. And most of the men who harass them keep their jobs.
Who's choosing this? That they end up out of a job? When you say that, that sounds like they got canned.
I mean, Edna was one of the stronger ones. She didn't leave the industry. She got another job. But sometimes by the time you reach a certain point and you've endured a certain amount of things, you know, especially if it's sexual harassment, some of these women went through an awful lot. You know, bosses exposing themselves in the workplace and following them into the ladies' room and throwing hot cups of coffee at them. You know, some
you mean
of the things.
Because they joined the lawsuit, or prior to that?
No,
even?
prior to that. Prior to that.
Exposing
my book
themselves
and my book
to-
isn't
I see.
entirely about Smith Barney. My book, I talk about, I think, 15 different brokerage firms in my book.
Right.
So, but my point is just that, you know, not everyone has the stamina to stick with it, and you do get a certain black mark on you when you speak up, and so it's hard to get another job. So, a lot of the women who I track in the book are doing nothing. You know, I mean, some of
Boy, I
them
hope
had,
their settlements were good.
well, some of them had nervous breakdowns. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff that happened to people.
Wow.
A lot of the men, well, actually, there's not a single man I read about who has any paper trail about what he did. And you can't sue them. Smith Barney and Merrill Lynch's women found a loophole for a lawsuit, but for the most part, as we've discussed, you can't sue them because of the mandatory arbitration clauses. So the only way you can show anything on a man's record is through his National Association of Securities Dealers files that are kept.
Right.
And there's not a single man I researched in 3 years working on the book who has any sign of anything on his record. Nothing.
If you can't sue the company, per se, for sexual discrimination, could you sue directly the person doing it to you? The male? I mean, what prevents you from mounting a civil suit against someone? Because I thought you could still sue anybody for anything, whether it had merit or not, and then of course if it's frivolous, it's thrown out and so forth. But you can initiate a lawsuit based on something. Is
Right.
that not
Well, I've
correct? I mean,
spoken
couldn't
to-
you have gone after? Could you go after someone who made your life unpleasant and skip the employer if you can't get to the employer? Or
Not if it all comes back to
the
saying
employment
that it,
place.
right.
The employer.
And I've had lawyers, I've had people ask me the question for these women who claim that they were raped by branch managers and things like that.
Oh dear.
Why not bring a criminal case?
Right.
And I've gone to lawyers and said, would you take that case? And they say, not a chance. And they say, Susan, lawyers don't even want to take rape cases, because what happens in a rape case? Just a plain old rape case. The woman gets blamed, she gets investigated, they try to find all of her old boyfriends. I mean, lawyers don't like those cases. And so you combine this kind of on-the-job situation with a protected branch manager who maybe is producing a lot for the firm, he's going to get protected, and character witnesses will come from within the firm. It's just a crazy case. Nobody's going to want it.
What could women do who are watching this or learning about this? Is there some recommended thing that the rest of us can do to try to help this kind of situation be reversed? What do? We read about 12 cases or 15 cases in your book and say, okay, that's it. I'm not going to those firms anymore if we want to. Or I'm going to go to those firms, but I'm going to talk to them about what their policies are today. How do the rest of us help this not happen to the women in the financial world? Do you know?
First thing is, I say don't give up. I mean, I think that Edna is a wonderful role model for this.
Absolutely.
And people say to me, what would you tell young women? Should they not go into the industry? And I say, absolutely not. That's giving up. That's just letting the existing power structure keep what they want to keep. And we all know sexual harassment's not about sex, it's about power. It's about people, making you uncomfortable and wanting to keep the power. You have to speak up when something happens on the job. You must. You have to do something about it, even if you think human resources is worthless and all of those things that you hear, because you've got to get some sort of a, legal something going. You have to put it on the record. And you have to find out on your first day at work what you're signing, especially now that it's not part of the U4 licensing agreement in the brokerage industry. You've got to take that stack of documents home and read them. Don't just sign them when you're sitting there doing your life insurance and your health insurance. You need to find out what you're getting into and understand what the firm is about. And importantly, this is not the only industry doing this anymore. The rest of corporate America saw what Wall Street was doing with mandatory arbitration and said, what a great idea. And now you can go into any company in any industry today and they can get you to sign away your rights to court. So really everybody should be paying attention to this.
I want to know more about what people who aren't going in the industry need to do, but we're going to break for a PSA. We'll be right back.
If you give me a fish...
Give a man a fish.
If you give someone a fish...
You feed them for a day. A day.
One day.
If you give someone a fish, you feed them for a day.
But if you teach a man to fish...
Teach me to fish.
Teach someone to fish.
And you feed me for a lifetime.
A lifetime.
My whole life.
If you teach someone to fish, you feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community. Find out what you can do. Give us a call.
Plant a tree for your tomorrow.
The Arbor Day Foundation invites you to celebrate life and plant a tree for the first day of school and the last, to bring songbirds close by, to celebrate a new life beginning and a life remembered. Plant a tree to help clear the air, to celebrate two lives coming together and a new home, to conserve energy, to celebrate a good report card and a good life. For all those special times, plant a tree. Each tree you plant makes a difference for a better neighborhood and a better world. Plant a tree and put a smile on the future. For your free Trees for America brochure, write the National Arbor Day Foundation.
Plant a tree, trees for America. Plant a tree today for all the world to share.
To cool the city, to celebrate Arbor Day, to clean the water.
Welcome back to Speak Up Presents. We're talking about sexual discrimination with Susan Antilla, who came here from New York and the cold north, Connecticut, wherever. Edna and Elizabeth, who live here. So glad you're all back here. I want to talk about what can we do about this, and I think you said something, Elizabeth, that everybody has to hear. You said it on break.
Well, I think each one of us has to look out for ourselves, besides the legal means. This is a bully on the playground. Sooner or later, you got to stand up to that bully. You might get smacked around, but it's not so likely they'll bully you again. I course, had an older brother. I learned really early. Wasn't any point being a peacenik. It wasn't going to get me anywhere. So that's been my mantra. That
Speak Up. That's the name of the show.
Exactly.
It's the
that's
name
right.
of the nonprofit that runs this public access.
Right then and there,
facility.
not to think it's going to get better by being quiet. And
that it'll go away. All of this will go away. Someone else will get up and speak. You said something good. Throw coffee at the guy.
Well,
But then you'd probably get, a McDonald kind of lawsuit on you.
No,
Just mean be loud.
Literally or figuratively. But I think that you have to take some responsibility yourself, not wait for the Ednas of the world to stand up for you. You've got to make a stand.
And if you're a quiet person,
probably
you
corporate America.
There's a woman behind you who is watching this who's going to stand up for you right then.
I think that you can't, whether it's the medical profession, when you're dealing with the medical profession, you've got to have some knowledge and speak up for yourself.
Oh dear, you can't get through the medical system at all if you can't.
That's
speak
right,
up
exactly.
Today.
You're
going to get creamed.
So what we need to teach
9 hours to get my mother in the hospital on Saturday, but I persevered.
Right, our daughters, our granddaughters, those people who are around us. One of my
many young women don't realize they're being discriminated. They think that was an old problem that we old ladies had. They don't even realize it until you show it to them.
That's right.
I had a young woman working for me, and when I wrote No Girls Allowed, discrimination against women in Tampa, and she said, well, thankfully there isn't that discrimination anymore like there used to be. And I said, excuse me, I think I remember you telling me there was a guy down the hall with big offices who would come by, and if I weren't in the office, he would sort of make you feel very uncomfortable. What would you call that? And you didn't know if you should tell him go away because you thought I would be mad at you or something. And she said, yeah. I said, that's what that is. That's using power in a way to make you feel very uncomfortable, and you felt odd. And she said, oh my God. And I noticed young women don't notice these little nuances so well. They think the battle was won already or something.
Well, I think that not only do the workplace, but I think in encouraging young girls today, I would certainly take a law course or two. And for instance, in this particular case, that certainly has been a nationwide situation for all of us. And I will tell you that out of the 25, and I was just one, I was the only one that objected at the settlement talks and mediation in Chicago in '97 in regards to a number of the ways that things were happening that had standing in the end. Eventually, Pam and Judy, who were in New York, opted out of the settlement to go on, or tried to go on to court. But what happened is the attorneys were paid ahead of the victims, and I was vehemently against that. Still have a problem with it. They were to have neutral arbitrators in the mediations and so forth, and yet they used the Duke Adjudication Center, who had had a 20-year investment banking relationship with Smith Barney. They have used
Duke, a bastion of sexual equality, I'm sure.
Which was very, very seriously involved in my case.
What is it, 90% fraternities over there? I don't remember.
But I will tell you, since my case and a number of correspondence through them, that they have shut down that adjudication center. Today it does not exist, with the exception of one person who I think answers the phone call there.
There were a lot of tricky things that went on in this case so far, weren't there? And I remember you telling me over
There's
the
a lot
years.
of things that I just don't think that people were aware of, because I think they tried to divide and conquer, and then they felt like they weren't going to have researchers and people that would delve into what we needed to do to accomplish what we're going to accomplish eventually. And they had their attorney for the corporate side was Mark Belnick, and as you know, after being with Tyco and so forth, he's been indicted on 2 major counts and criminal charges, which he's going to, come into court by the end of this month. And
it wasn't a woman who took him down, was it? Just wondering.
I quite honestly think in all these cases, it's all been self-inflicted.
Do you think, like some of the folks do, I just have to throw this in, and you know I'm going to, and that is, did Martha Stewart just get convicted, or let's not put it that way, not convicted. Did she get brought up on charges more because she was a woman than anything else, do you think? Because there are people who are saying, yeah, okay, but what happened to all those men with the SNL, the Enron, the this and that? How come we went after her as hard, or how come she was gone after so hard? What do you think? Is that part of this or not really?
Well, I think, first of all, I have to tell you that the truth will always be the truth, regardless of lack of understanding, disbelief, or ignorance. And I've always been about the truth. And I think part of her case had to do with the fact that they didn't think she did.
Right.
And so I have a problem with that part of it. But on the other hand, I feel like
let's decide there's no men who lie.
That
okay. But no, I'm just saying, given equal things.
Having gone through what I have gone through in this particular lawsuit, and seen what's happened or not happened, as the case may be, I think that they have certainly used a lot of her case for entertainment value.
Well, she's a media draw. There's no question about that. But are you saying
quite frankly,
more so
I think that she has fans on both sides, and I believe that she will continue to have fans on her side as much as not on her side. And I think that what should happen will happen. I think that it will, if she comes forward, and I think that her whole team is going to work very, very hard to exonerate her still.
Well, I heard that she had put up on her website, or I read somewhere that she had instantly
thanked everyone.
Thanked everybody on her website, but she included the words, "I've done nothing wrong," and that they were removed very quickly because her adjudication will be based on whether she's remorseful, and she was still taking, did you see this? I thought that was fascinating. She whips this up on her website and goes, whoops, I better not. I may go to jail for longer than I could think of. I don't know if she can get anywhere on appeal, but it's interesting. They've put all the jurors up. I saw on one of the, or a bunch of jurors have already gone up on TV today to say they stand behind their decision, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot going on with that. Elizabeth, what do you think about it? Do you think she was picked out more than some of the other folks that we know lately have really done some things, and they're male?
I think when you lie, I think the problem her, and I never thought about it, but Edna has a good point about the entertainment value. Why did her attorneys ever let it go to trial? That, if she had said, okay, I did it, I'm sorry, I pay the money back, and then it'd be over. But the continuing to profess innocence. Remember, she was a stockbroker at one point.
That's the biggest problem I think she had, is because everyone knows she knows the rules. It's
she
not
knows
like
the rules.
You don't know the rules.
And
then
bribe,
you have your secretary testify against you. That's a tough one.
Yeah. But if the truth be told, arrogance was certainly part of it.
Yeah.
And but insider trading is such an enormous thing. I know in my office, the top producer in an office once where I was fired right on the spot for insider trading. I mean, it was just nothing to be done. So.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of a really bad thing. It hurts an awful lot of people. Do you think, because you've been reporting on this for a long time, I mean, in the whole financial area, do you think Martha got picked out more than if she were a guy?
I think before all of this happened, she was always picked on and picked apart, maybe more because she's a woman. But she, if she broke the law, as the jurors said, and that's what they said, I think the law is the law. So, and you have to remember too, we're in an era right now where we're looking at a lot of people in corporate America. She's not the only trial in town up where I live right now. It's the,
who do you have up there now?
Oh, the Regas trial is going on, and the Kozlowski trial is wrapping up, and we've got Frank Quattrone is coming back. It's pretty busy.
No, you've got a lot to work on, don't you?
So,
really do.
So it's really an era where we're looking at executives. So I don't think we're picking on her.
This has been going like a really fast hour, and I'm so glad you came to town, Susan. And you're going to be speaking to the Network of Executive Women tomorrow on their Executive Women of the Year award, and I think business and professional women get to see you the next day. And we really appreciate that so much. I think they just told me I have about 3 minutes. And if there's a parting thought you'd like to do a minute apiece on, that would be great, or like 42 seconds, because I want to thank, this is public access television. This is Speak Up Tampa Bay Community Network, and we have on our crew here a couple volunteers. We have Travis, who's floor directing, correct? Was it Travis?
Yes.
Thank you. And behind me is Mark Carbott, who's one of my staff, and we have staff and volunteers in the control room. Freddie, Mary, and Dan are back there. I want to thank all of them. This is how a show gets put on here, and you can get to put on your own show too, so you just call us down here. But parting thoughts?
I think each one of us has to take some personal responsibility. I take my hat off to those women who really have gone above and beyond the call of duty to make it better for all of us.
Appreciate it. Edna?
I would echo the same thing. I think you have to just continue on and do the right thing, and everything will eventually come to what it should be. I truly believe.
Women need to be encouraged to speak up.
They need to be encouraged to speak up, and they need to do it now. And they need to encourage others of all ages to do the same thing right away. And I think that there's a lot of men out there as well applauding, you know, to see the right thing done, because let's face it, when you help women, you help men as well.
Oh, you always help men when you help women. And I think most of the young men know that deal, because women in charge are usually much more understanding than men have been, or notoriously, although there's a lot of men coming up that have sensitivities to family issues and all kinds of things that we wish them to have. But I think you're really right about that. Susan, a parting thought?
It's really the same thing. It's so important to speak up, and the women I have talked to who have the most regrets are the ones who sign gag orders and who feel that they've betrayed women and are disappointed in the end.
You know, I just did a program for another group that you and I belonged to the other day, and I almost have to end with Irma Bombeck's quote again, because it just seems like the right one, isn't it right? Yeah. I mean, I did quote Bella extensively, of course, but this I have to say. Irma Bombeck said, "Seize the moment. Try to remember all those women on the Titanic who passed up the dessert cart." So when the time is now, we all really need to be doing that. I appreciate very much again that you came, and I hope that we see you all next week with Speak Up Presents. Good night.